Spectrovision Radio. Spectrovision Radio.
Sometimes people, when they have an encounter, there's this association with this incredible symphonic music, which, by the way, people have this in near-death experiences. There's this constellation of experiences.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Hello everybody and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. I'm Jo Hickey Hall and this time I am joined by author Mike Fiorito, and I have been reading Mike's book UFO Symphonic Journeys into Sound, which looks at the kind of phenomenon related to sound and music, generally to do with UFOs, but as we've just been talking about, there's lots of crossover, as there always is, between UFO phenomena and fairy experiences. So welcome, Mike. How are you doing?
Jo, thank you so much. It's great to chat with you. I know you've been very busy, but thank you so much. I think this is going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps afterwards you can tell us about your new book too, which kind of leads on.
Sure.
But can you just talk us about the kind of premise of the book when you were writing?
Sure. I'll take a step back and first say that I'm a musician. So I'm deeply interested in music. I'm also a music journalist. So I've done a lot of music journalism, going to shows. I would never call myself a critic. I'm an enthusiast. And I've been on this journey, I don't know, let's just say about 6 years. So I've written 4 books that are kind of related. And I know we're here to talk about UFO Symphonic, but it's been on a journey of books that I've gotten to this place. I wrote a book called Mescalito Riding His White Horse, which was about, I had met one of the founders of the bluegrass music in the UK. And I wrote a book about the connection between that music, and really that could apply to all music, and spirituality. And then that kind of got me on a journey to writing about this in earnest. I wrote a book called For All We Know. So that's a narrative. It's written as fiction, but it's memoirish, and anyone who reads it would detect that. But I wanted to be able to tell the UFO story, so a paranormal story, through a narrative form, not in a kind of academic or researched way, in a storytelling way. Then I started work on UFO Symphonic, which was now more of a research book. And the way I did that is I kind of asked some simple questions. So I'm a storyteller, as I'm sure you have gathered from reading my work. It's not so much, say, academic rigor. I didn't put it through some, research rigor. I asked simple questions. Can you tell me a story that relates music to something inexplicable? And what's interesting, Jo, is the responses I got back were myriad. It wasn't the same story told over and over again. There was one instance where James Iandoli, I don't know if you know him, he's a podcaster as well. He had an experience where he saw a UFO as he was driving in the distance, and it was, a bright light in the distance, and as he was driving, it was moving across like the skyline. But he's driving. You can't just, you can't drive over streets and that kind of thing. But he followed it as far as he could. And what he said is the UFO, it started to look like, initially it looked like a nuts and bolts traditional UFO. And then it morphed into this plasmatic thing. And he said felt very strong psychic connection to it. Sometime later, he was driving again, but he was tired. He'd been working late shifts. And in about the same spot, he said he saw something again in the distance. Then he said he had a car crash. And he basically fell asleep driving. because he was driving late nights.
Mm.
And then he had this psychic telepathic experience with this being or beings. And what he said is he heard this great music, this lush, beautiful symphonic music, crystalline, uh, gorgeous symphony, and it like nothing he'd ever heard. Now, that kind of story is something I've heard a few times where people have this experience. Have you heard of this before?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Um, and there's another what's his name? Uh, Lucci, uh, Orfeo Angelucci. So he was actually Carl Jung refers to him in his book on flying saucers. He was an American, Orfeo Angelucci, and he had a kind of similar experience where what he said is, and I wrote about this in the book, he saw this small enclosure, this small, uh, almost like the size of an elevator or something, or a lift. He walked into this thing. It was a spaceship, a UFO. And then when he walked in, it was this gigantic, like cathedral, this spacious thing. And again, he heard something like that. He heard this beautiful, gorgeous music. Um, However, that kind of story, one of the beautiful things about this is music, the way people relate to it is so myriad. And the stories and the things that they reported back to me were just were new each time. There was another instance where, and I'm just kind of giving some of the stories that were related to me. And as you saw in UFO Symphonic, I had narrative as well. So I carried the book with my narrative, doing my research, which I looked into what are the origins of music. You know what they tell us? We don't know. We
Yeah.
just don't know. We believe that uh, early early humanoids had the ability to vocalize and to sing before they could talk. So
Mm.
that's very interesting. Centuries of emotion, of you know consciousness without the ability to articulate in words. I think that's deeply interesting. And in fact, the prelingual aspect of music and the fact that music, and I always say when I say music, I mean frequencies or droning sounds. It's not just music, it's
Mm.
sound
Mm.
that has the ability to deliteralize. So it takes us out of ourselves,
Mhm.
dissolves the ego. So anyone who's used binaural beats for meditation or you have two frequencies going in each ear, different frequencies. And it has this kind of warble effect where it puts you in a hypnagogic state.
Mm.
And you can take that as far. You can, uh, uh, Bob Monroe who created the Monroe Institute, used binaural beats to, interestingly enough, he was encountering sentient beings in his dream state or hypnagogic state. And what's interesting is these sentient beings were giving him advice on how to make humanity better. Isn't that funny?
Amazing.
This pattern of we encounter beings who want to help us and take us out of our uh, crisis. There are other stories, though, and I'm sort of weaving this all together. A friend of mine conveyed a story, it's in the book, and you'll often notice that there's emotion, there's grief associated, there's experience associated, and trauma associated with these experiences. So a friend of mine had uh, a partner. I don't think they were married. She was a very talented violin player and a fiddle player in the style of music she was playing. And she died young from cancer. Uh, and she was very talented. She played a lot of instruments. She had a flute that Frank kept. And Frank has been so devoted to the memory of Sue Cunningham. And he had this flute that you had to assemble in a box. And a good friend of ours came over, I had mentioned him earlier. He's a bluegrass musician, Peter Rowan, who's in that world. He's famous. He's well known. Peter's a very talented musician, multi-instrumentalist, songwriter. And he just observed, he said, "Oh, Frank, what is that?" And Frank said, "Well, that's Sue's flute, but it doesn't play." So he said, "Do you mind if I look at it?" And Frank had this song on his mind that he was burning to play for Peter. He wanted to play. Here's this legend. He has a song that he's written and he wanted to play for him. So as Frank is telling Peter the story about this song, which is kind of based on a folktale, actually, like an English folktale. Peter is assembling the flute. Frank's not thinking much of it. And then Peter has the flute assembled and he starts to play on it. And now Frank is telling his story, and Peter says, "Okay, here's the melody." And he gives him the melody. And then he says, "And here's the chorus. Frank, you just gave a verse. Here's the chorus." So they wrote this song in real time like this, playing the flute. Peter puts the flute down. The song is finished. I have this all on tape, by the way. I have the audio of this.
Oh, beautiful.
Then they begin to discuss what they've done. Peter picks up the flute. It won't play.
Yeah.
It's silent. It's mute. Interesting that it came alive for that important to Frank.
Mm.
And what Frank's brought it to life.
That's
Beautiful,
really beautiful,
right?
really beautiful. It's like a kind of gateway between the worlds, isn't it? That something holding such resonance of this, this couple's love for one another and grief, and it can be brought to life by somebody that has a kind of magical hand with music or a magical skill with music, that's what they bring to the world. And suddenly this object, which is really more than an object, is brought to life. That's absolutely gorgeous. And I guess that's what my question would be, is that do you find that music seems to be some kind of gateway?
Yeah, it does have as I said, that the way that people describe these songs, sometimes music can bring you into an altered state,
Mm.
ego dissolution state where magical things occur. And sometimes in music can emerge when you're in a state. So in other words, sometimes the music precedes this segue into an altered state, but sometimes music emerges, like people who have an experience have some kind of sighting or emotional experience, have this explosion of music that occurs. I mean, and certainly with not to go too far down that road, but with, say, psychedelics, the power of music is extraordinary to take you to, I mean, I've had incredible experiences, and nothing singular in that respect, but the acuity of your senses is so heightened that hearing something, it's almost like you're dreaming in real time, and you could dream a whole, which we really are anyway. We're always dreaming. We're always making up stories. Uh, Not that reality. I'm not saying that the world isn't real. Our relationships aren't real. Our children and friends aren't. That's not what I'm saying. They're provisionally real. That of course they're important to us, and the things we do are important, but it's not the whole story, is really what I'm saying.
Thinking on that, the way that when we are in an altered state and we hear music, it's as if we have more of an accessibility into those worlds. And so I guess music can also sometimes be a kind of calling card from those realms too. I mean, some of the experiences that have been relayed to me, I spoke to a guy who relayed how his uncle had had an experience while walking across a kind of marshy land in northwest Wales. and he heard this kind of very strange music on the breeze and turned around to see a circle of white beings stood, in this marshy land that you can't actually cross over as a human being. You have to kind of pick your way through. And
Mm,
there was this circle of beings dressed in white, standing over there. And when he felt scared he felt a sense of dread and went to run, the music became louder, and it was almost kind of chasing him.
mm,
So, you have that sort of experience. And then you have other experiences where I spoke to a guy in northern Michigan, and he talked about when he was a child having gone into almost kind of being called actually that morning into the forest, and it was to a part of the forest he didn't know very well, and he was drawn by music. He was kind of
mm,
lulled there. So you've got situations where people hear it and it does not feel something that they want to go towards, and it's a dreadful feeling and they're running from it. And then you've got other situations where we might kind of open to it and have these experiences. And
mhm,
these the motif of hearing music is throughout folklore too, of course. But hearing that people are having these experiences still nowadays. I mean, in your book, you talk about how some people, when they're creating the music, they start to feel overtaken by it, and these kind of crescendos build. You talk about Sebastiano, the composer, who was experiencing how the colors and the atmosphere and the feelings are brought
mhm,
into the space when he is working with music. So
mhm.
it's really fascinating to hear how rich these experiences are, and also kind of how the regularity with which they happen too. It's fascinating. Yeah, is this something that you think people don't tend to necessarily talk about?
Yeah, I think it's kind of ignored. And so I think that absolutely everyone has a transcendent experience when they listen to music.
Yeah.
So that could be, and I think there's a wide range of experiences. It could be simple reverie. You could have, not to make fun of, the rich kind of tech bro type guy who, has a Tesla, drives an expensive car and puts on Journey on his way to his Google job, makes a ton of money. I'm making fun of it, but still goes aloft into a dream and is having some fantasy when that's happening. That's kind of discounted. Somehow that isn't important. Isn't it fascinating, Joe, how in modern society that fantasy is sort of less important. It's sort of looked at as, well, that's just fantasy. But meanwhile, we crave it desperately. Look at the movies that people watch and the music that they listen to, the video games. There's this absolute craving, but there's not the same amount of honesty about what people are getting from it. So I think you can listen to music in that way, that you could be in more than one place at a time. You could be in the past. Um, Also, you can listen to music with, say, more intention. So if you listen to 443 hertz, and there are different frequencies you can listen to, for example, that put you into a meditative state. And that meditative state can lead to, mystical experiences and deeply profound, life-changing experiences. And this is nothing new. We've been doing this, human beings, since time immemorial. We have found whale bones that were used as flutes or droning instruments. So just imagine being in some underground cave or some enclosed space. Again, something we as humans seem to love this experience of finding enclosed spaces, think churches, temples, but a cave where you're making music in the dark, and the profound experience of that, being led by uh, uh, a shaman through a ritual experience, whatever that experience may be. Maybe it's a calling to the dead, maybe it's a calling to the spirits, maybe it's a seasonal ritual. But that would be deeply profound and put you in an altered state even before you put the music on, even before you begin playing the music, being in the dark.
Yeah.
And when you hear, even poetry begins to approximate music. It's metrical,
Mm.
right? Once I start using "I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows shall I have there, and a hive for the honeybee." I've immediately set the stage. This Something different is happening. There's something sacred. I'm calling that space. When you do it with music, it's even more entrancing. In the book, I talk about, and I do want to get back to Sebastiano, but I'll just mention this. My wife and I went to a Wachuma ceremony. So this was indigenous American shamans leading this experience, and it was with drumming and with chanting and singing. And you take this is San Pedro is the sacred plant, which is like an alkaloid. It's like mescaline. Uh, it's similar to that. But through this hypnotic playing, you were pulled into, I don't know if pulled into, you entered a place. Actually, it was a place of the heart. Really, it took me deeply into this deep place of compassion, of uh, my heart asking me to have more compassion. Really, my mother had been ill, and we were all very good to my mother. My mother was very difficult towards the end, um, but it needed what we all needed was more compassion, and that's what came back to me. Yes, I saw orbs and lights, but it was this gush of powerful emotion and this sort of revelation. Really, this from the heart. That's the experience I had. But
Mhm.
there's no doubt that the music and the constant pace of that music and the hypnotic aspect of it, that repetition, when something occurs repetitively, it stays the same, but you change. You enter different levels and different phases.
Mm.
I have found, and we find, this kind of droning music or chanting music is around. Humans do it around the world. I mean, in Scottish piping is sort of a
Mm.
droning sound.
Very true.
Indian music with the sitar, of course, the tempura, the sarod, that. Of course, chanting,
Mm.
um, Gregorian chants, and church music, which I love. I think, yeah, there's a section. It's funny because it's been a while since I've written UFO Symphonic, and I do have a section on Palestrina, and the Renaissance Italian composer who's famous for his like claim to fame is he helped the church recognize polyphonic music. So prior to Palestrina, you would have monophonic, which is one voice like Gregorian chant.
Mhm.
And northern Europeans started to experiment with polyphonic music. So church, the Rome was like, this is not good. This is evil. Think about it. It's just two, three voices occurring, more than one voice, more than one part. But it was deemed demonic and crazy,
Because it was
um,
powerful.
because it was powerful and it was different. It was political,
Mm.
really. And he wrote for Pope Marcelli. Uh, Palestrina did the Mass of Pope Marcelli, and I highly encourage everyone to go out there and listen to it. It sounds like the history of human emotion going back to prehistoric times. So he wrote for the Pope and said, "Look how beautiful this is. How could this be awful?" And supposedly then polyphonic music was permitted in the church. I mean, that may be apocryphal. I'm not exactly sure, but it makes for a great story.
It does.
And if you think about, the Beatles, when the Beatles sang and you had different parts, and how beautiful it sounds when you have different parts come together, and it's basically different notes that fit into, like, say, a chord, and when they come together, there's just such a it turns a light on in your consciousness and in your heart, really.
Going back to what you were saying earlier about how, they can take us back in time, I really enjoyed what Joshua Cutchin wrote,
Hmm.
in your book, because of course Joshua wrote your book
Hmm.
about how music can actually be like a time capsule, frozen in
Hmm.
time, something frozen in time, which when we hear it, it can just move us to places, whether it's our childhood or whether it's somewhere that we've visited decades and decades ago, or somebody that we've met that we, loved very much in our lives that's no longer with us, and how
Hmm.
the timing of that can sometimes be profound because, we might dream of that person the night before, and then the first song we hear on the radio that morning is their song, or, a song
Right,
that you shared with them, or something
right.
about the time that you spent with them. And I think it kind of taps into a lot of the synchronicities that we have a lot of the time, these sorts of experiences with music. It can really change us. And I love what you said there about how this experience is the world over, all cultures, and that the humming and the beat, which is our first experience of coming into life. We're held in our mother's womb, we hear her heartbeat, we hear the sounds
Hmm.
from wherever people are located, in their homes, in their localities, and we get to recognize those kind of sounds and rhythms and
Hmm.
reverberations. And not only that, but we kind of experience that vibration too, don't we? It kind of ripples through our body. So our sort of very coming into being is with music. And
Absolutely. Yeah. You
yeah.
make a great point there, and I read about that, in my current book. And there's scientific credulity to, so when you talk about, um, because I'm not following a science here. I'm coming at this from a kind of a humanities and a spirituality perspective, and I'm not really hanging on to. I'm not looking, but just to make the connection, when you say you have a certain experience and you're 16 years old and you're listening to music and your brain chemistry is in such a way, and now you hear this music and it freezes in that experience.
Yeah.
And when you hear that music later, it supposedly I've read that it replicates that kind of configuration that in your the sort of state of your brain
Mm.
replicates that experience, and so you get that rush, that feeling. I mean, who hasn't been, I'll put on music when I'm vacuuming, and then you'll hear an old song and you'll like just get gushed with tears, and you go, where did that come from? It just swooped in and took over. And I loved what you said about the synchronicity. So there's a funny irony. You go to a bar, the bar where you went with, your ex-girlfriend, and now you hear that song and you kind of laugh, and you laugh the song that you both heard, and it's like the universe smiling back at you. And what Josh and I talked about too, in the title of the chapter that in my conversation with him was about telepathy. Music is a form of telepathy. So when you're, especially if you're playing something like jazz or something that has an improvisational aspect to it, like Indian raga music or jazz or blues, where you have a structure, but there is a structure, but there's also a lot of freedom.
Mhm.
Now, how do you know when that change is going to happen? How do you know when the timing signature is going to change? You can't discuss it out loud. I mean, I guess you can call things, but often is the case is you intuit it.
Yeah.
You both know, you all know. I've seen music where there's some kind of avant-garde music. Fred Frith, who is a major composer in that space, and I've seen him perform with. He played. Um, he had this fascinating platform with percussion and string instruments. He plays a variety of things you can't even name. He makes some of the instruments. And there was a cello player and then someone playing another set of like percussive instruments. Now, Fred Frith he's like the dawn of this kind of music, but he wasn't leading it only. It was each of them taking turns to become the main voice and changing the course. And you could tell this was in real time.
Yeah.
And they didn't discuss it. There wasn't, you could tell it was improvised, not in a clumsy way, in a very organic way. Three phenomenally sensitive and talented musicians that who were all listening to each other, listening very closely. Um, if I can go back to Sebastiano for a moment, so it's funny because Sebastiano was in Argentina, and I met him through. I don't know if you know Jeff Kripal.
Oh, yes. I haven't met him, but we've kind of met online kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and Jeff's a great person, very generous, kind, and I think Jeff's done a great job of providing all of us with a framework to have these conversations that um, Jeff is just so sober and rational and doesn't take the bait for hyperbolic kind of stuff. He's very paced in his approach. I tell him that I've told him he writes like a Nebraskan farmer, and he got a great kick out of that. Just very calm and, just talking about the land.
Yeah.
Um, so Jeff introduced me to Sebastiano, and I had a conversation with Sebastiano, which is in the book. So Sebastiano is a composer and a conductor.
Yeah.
So he said when he begins to so he gets a piece of music and he's conducting a piece of music of a composer who's long dead, and it's this multi-phased experience that he goes through. Now he was very hesitant to call it paranormal, but I said everything you're saying is paranormal, by the way. Everything you're saying. You go into this relationship with the composer where you begin to dialogue with the composer. Yes, you have notations, but you have to make some decisions. How would the composer have wanted it? And what he said is it's like you're almost having daily conversations.
Yeah.
You've revived this person and they're with you
Mm.
and you're doing this together. And I said, and what's not paranormal about that, Sebastiano? You're kind of invoking this spirit. and the spirit is guiding you through this process, so that it feels authentic, it feels real. Um, I thought that was fascinating, that whole subject.
It really very much is. And I think even, you know, I've been to gigs before and I've watched bands where they have that. And it's kind of like that hive, when I can't remember what it's called, when the birds just know when to fly together,
Right, right. Yeah.
that kind of resonance with each other. And really, when you're in the audience watching a band, and that's happening between them, you really feel it. And it's such a buzz, you're sharing
Hmm.
in that. And I guess it's a kind of reciprocal thing then as well, because as more as you're kind of buzzing off what they're doing. I mean, you can even see it sometimes. You can see the kind of light
Illumination.
merging
Yeah.
between, the members. But when that happens, it really gets something deep going. You can walk out of a gig and feel like you've had some kind of profound experience. It's absolutely fascinating. Yeah, I really enjoyed that part of the book. Do you delve into that further in your latest book then?
Yeah, so this is the new book that just came
Mhm.
out. It's called The Inner Space of Outer Space, and I really pick up on the work that I did because as you know, I'm sure in writing the book that you're writing, what happens is as you're doing research, you're researching and you don't stop when
Yeah.
you're writing the book. You just keep doing the work because you're passionate about it and you're interested. But at some point you have to stop the book. So the research keeps growing. And I said, okay, at this point, I'm just going to push this off to the next book. And so the inner space of outer space definitely picks up where UFO Symphonic left off. I have some uh, experience or accounts there at the end of the book.
Mhm.
I did want to include some experience or accounts, but this is really me carrying through, kind of looking at the origins of music. As so, one of the things that I say is that we get the sounds of music from archetypes, which come from nature. So, for example, there's the sounds of the ocean, that kind of the way ocean water might come in. Do you know the Gemopodes by Satie? There's that beautiful
Oh,
song,
beautiful,
and
beautiful, like a lullaby.
and right, right, and lullaby, very key. Interesting that we hear lullabies like you were saying when we're babies. That's how we're first spoken to. So these archetypal sounds like ocean water, and you think of Jamapides, the way it's that meter, that rhythm, it has this kind of like lapping, you know,
Yes.
lapping with low sounds by the shore while on the roadway or and the pavement's gray. I hear it in the deep heart's core. Um, and also just, rain or uh, water from a creek, thunder. We get these sounds and they're a part of, I can think of certain Led Zeppelin songs that have thunder in them.
Mm.
It's the sound of a guitar. Um, so yeah, the origins of of music, and it's basically nature. We're retelling some of what we've experienced in nature, and I do focus on a few composers, musicians. So I focus on the musician Sun Ra, who was a jazz musician, born in Birmingham, Alabama, about 1914. Very inventive, innovative, forward thinking, and has changed music up until this day. Ra claimed that he was visited by sentient beings who told him to make music to harmonize the people of Earth. And just fascinating character. By the way, I should mention that for each composer, I chose a tarot card randomly, and I chose a tarot card that I would then sort of envision their story through that.
Mm.
Interestingly, I chose for Sun Ra the Magician, which is a perfect fit. I chose the major arcana, I should say. I
Yes.
only selected from. And if you see pictures of Sun Ra, he's dressed up in a kind of spaceman outfit. He wears an antenna, a hat with an antenna, but very playful, but also serious.
The Sun Ra Orchestra.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen them a couple of times.
Oh, cool, cool.
They were absolutely out of this world.
Yes, that that would be a very good description.
Yeah, we saw them in a like quite a relatively small venue, not far from where we live in Bristol. And
Mm,
then we saw them at a festival as well. And of course they come into the audience,
right.
and then you start kind of dancing around in a line with them in the audience, and again, one of those amazing experiences.
And like a church revival. So he kind of
Yeah.
brought together, sort of the southern, church revival feeling with some intergalactic kind of infusion put in there. He was also a syncretic thinker, so he's very much interested in theosophy and Steiner, and deeply interested in the modern music of the time, the avant-garde music, and was incorporating these ideas. I mean, we're just catching up to Sun Ra today.
Mm.
But what was interesting is if you look at, say, the Marseille deck of the tarot card, and you see a platform with, objects and, technology, and he's half magician, half trickster, his sort of, which Sun Ra was. I mean, he was very playful in his language. So he had about 50 or 60 names he called himself. And, he would say, some people call me Mr. Ra. Some people call me Mr. E. What does your mother call you? Well, she just calls me son. Very playful, like the magician. And then I won't go into all of them, but I then go into Pink Floyd. And what's weird is that maybe I didn't shuffle the deck well enough. I chose the Ace of Pentacles for Pink Floyd, which I associated with Syd Barrett because I really focused on the early Pink Floyd, who Syd Barrett claimed to be very influenced by Sun Ra, was
Mm.
impacted by that, his music, his composition. And I really trace, and the reason I chose the composers and musicians I did is because they were using technology and synthesizers, Moog synthesizers. They were using technology to kind of project this futuristic vision of humanity going into space. And of course, when I say, so the title of the book, The Inner Space of Outer Space, is kind of going out there is going in here, and going in here is going out there, as above, so below. And I sort of walk through some of the other. I talk about New Age music as well, um, and now the incorporation of animal sounds and nature sounds into music that was in New Age music. And although New Age music often gets kind of derided for being, I don't know, hokey or something, I think it was that genre was like a laboratory for musicians who did some very interesting things, and it was great success too. It was a successful genre. I got to meet Stephen Halpern, who is one of the founders of New Age music, and we talked about his music, what he calls healing music. So New Age is, the genre title when you go to the catalog section, but he refers to it as healing music. And so he made music playing with frequencies to aid in meditation, to aid in yoga. He also had experiences of his own. So he says that when he got put into certain states, it opened up the ability to have encounters.
Yeah.
And so, in being in that state, when you put yourself in that state and you're composing in that state, it sort of opens the channels of communication. And he had an experience which I talk about in the book. I highly encourage people to go look at it. And I should say too, I'll sort of end on the composer's part, that he claims that he was very influential in Brian Eno's music. He felt that Brian Eno kind of stole from him a little bit.
Right.
And
Wow.
uh,
Yeah.
I mean, Brian Eno has his own incredible path of music and composition style and approach that was, I think, highly unique, and singular in many respects. Of
Mhm.
course, people can be influenced by other people. Um,
Yeah, and maybe they were getting the same frequency. Maybe they were receiving on the same frequency. Because I tend to find that too, is that sometimes these ideas arise at the same time in different parts
right,
of the world, and it's
right,
literally that you've just caught the same breeze, basically. And if you're
well,
open to it and you are able to express it or realize it in some way, it does happen like that. But it's a really interesting point. So
yeah.
in UFO Symphonic, can you talk a little about how the kind of music and UFO experience crossover happens? The
Yeah.
stories which kind of seem to evidence, this connection between the two.
Yeah, I think that what I found is, so it's highly various. So sometimes people have a UFO experience that's associated with absolute silence and with an eerie kind of silence that's almost has sound and substance and thickness to it. So there's not one experience. But as I had mentioned, that sometimes people have, when they have an encounter, there's this association with this incredible symphonic music, which, by the way, is something you hear. I was reading Dr. Penny Sartori writing about near-death experiences. People have this in near-death experiences. They have this, and in fact, what I am saying is that there's this constellation of experiences, of which UFO is one. It could be fairy encounter.
Yes.
It could be near-death experience. It could be out-of-body experience, and that's really what I'm saying.
Mm.
In the fairy stories that I found, some of them from Yeats, and then just doing other research. What's interesting is that the fairy stories. So sometimes it's not one kind of story too. So sometimes you're singing music. So if the fairies are singing music and you join in with them,
Mm.
you better get it right. Because if you
Mhm.
don't get it right, you're gonna have consequences.
Yeah.
But if you get it right, if you curry favor through music, then you become kind of honored and cherished and protected,
Yeah.
right?
It's where your
Um,
heart is when you're taking part, isn't it? Not taking part just to get something, like the
right.
story of the man with the hump on his back, and he gets,
Hmm.
told he hears the fairy singing, and he sings it back to them, and he's kind of rewarded with having this disfigurement removed, and then somebody else thinks, oh, I'll have a bit of that, who doesn't offer the song from
Right.
their heart with unconditionally, let's say,
Right.
but in order to grasp something and suffers the consequences, gets an extra hump on his back. Yeah, it's about intent.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
it's sort of like it's like a passivity. It's you can't demand these things. You
Mm.
can't demand I don't feel. You can demand, like, what is the formula? Whitley
Yeah.
Strieber asked me, what music can you use to call a UFO? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. I know there are people that talk about there's like the dog whistle, or there's a whistle or a call, or I just feel that these things are more intuitive, and
Mm.
you can set the stage for it. You
Yes.
can invite, but you can't demand.
Yeah.
Like any mystical experience, there's this level of grace and passivity, a transience, noetic experience
Mm.
that William James talks about in varieties of religious experiences. You have passivity, it just occurs, you didn't demand it. Noetic experience, it's illuminating. It's transient, is another.
Mhm.
And so, in a similar way, music happens in different ways uh, in the paranormal experience, of which UFO is one.
Mm.
But some people will say, you know, I don't see the relationship. So I've had that people say they don't see what that connection is. And I think to me it just seems obvious, and I didn't mean that to sound arrogant, just that music takes you out of yourself. And when you're in that state of ego dissolution, you're now swimming in the waters of the collective unconscious, or Akashic records. There are different words for these things. They may not be exactly the same, but you're out of yourself and into the bigger, uh, the realm, a larger realm that includes more than just you.
Mm.
And it's interesting, it includes more than just you, although on some levels, I think maybe we are all just one, and the others that we're seeing are reflections of the one,
Mhm.
as we are. And when you have that state of, yogic um, union, um, you you feel that it's uh, first of all, it's bigger than you.
Mhm.
You are just one piece, component of this larger collection of beings, which are not necessarily just human and multifarious. And they're not just, I include trees and waters and oceans and the sky. And it's more than just sentient. Where does sentient begin and non-sentience? And I think that gets murky.
Mm.
Um, if I could just give an illustration of that, I mean, if I'm made of the stuff of the earth. I'm this collection of flesh and bones that's nourished on the water and the food that was grown in the grass by the sun. And I'm just a temporary manifestation of that uh, for the moment, and hopefully do a decent job of try to do a good job of protecting this patch of the world while I'm in it.
Oh, that's really beautiful, and I think it's
Thank you.
a lovely place to end actually on that
Yeah.
thought. The word while you were describing that was kind of divine, something about
Well, thank you.
the divine and our the our the beauty in our potential, or the potential of our beauty being reflected back to us throughout this somehow. This idea that we're all
Yeah.
one. Yeah, and I'm with you there. I agree. Something that I like to write about and explore more too. So I look forward to your book that's just been released too, and I'll put details of both below. Thank you so much for this lovely conversation. I'm so
Yeah.
I feel really moved by what we've discussed today, and it's lovely to meet you.
It's really great to meet you, Joe, and I'm very excited to read your work. So please let me know. I know we're friends on the socials, but I'm very, very interested to read with your expertise in fairy lore. I can't wait to get into what you have to say.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, have a lovely day where you are,
You
and
too.
yeah, we'll speak again soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Bye, Joe.
Thanks so much for listening and watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider joining us on Patreon for dozens more episodes of unreleased bonus content, monthly online events, and a private chat. We are a warm, supportive community, and it really helps to support the project. Find us on patreon.com/The Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast.
Spectrovision Radio.